How do we communicate science more effectively? To a nation watching reality television. Now, there's nothing wrong per se with reality television. I will leave that to every individual to decide for themselves. But the point is that science is shaping the way we live. And we're a very distracted America right now. We're a very distracted globe right now. I've been thinking about this for a long time. I've been thinking about communicating science for many years. And my story starts in graduate school. I was in a marine biology program. I was studying the very charismatic sea cucumber. And I was doing a lot of reproductive work, a lot of population modeling. But at the same time, I took a job as a top 40 radio personality. And while this seems like a tangent, it's really not. Because I noticed early on that at the university, we could have a phenomenally good scientist come and speak to everyone. And 15, 20 people in the audience, that was pretty good. But with the radio station, we could pull out 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people to be part of a community service event, whether it was collecting food for Thanksgiving or anything like that. And we made it fun and we made it engaging, and we were using basic social marketing strategies that the science community wasn't really exposed to. And so while the goals of pop radio are certainly different than the goals of academia, it seemed clear that perhaps the science community might learn a little something from adopting similar strategies. Now, from there, I went on to work on Capitol Hill, and it was a bit alarming to realize how infrequently science influenced the policymaking process on really important things that are going to impact all of our lives. I could be meeting with 5 science groups a day on a particular piece of legislation that was coming up, and they didn't really have a take-home message. They weren't clear. They would talk to me in statistics and p-values. Some people even printed out PowerPoint slides and presented those to me. Never do that if you're ever trying to communicate. And so at the same time, you'd have pseudoscientific groups coming in, talking about how climate change was a big conspiracy, but they were funny and they were articulate. They had fancy PhDs after their names, maybe not in science, and they served food. And so at the end of the day, when those staffers needed to decide what to go back and tell their boss about, it often wasn't the science that was getting through. And so I decided to dedicate more of my time to connecting this gap, this disconnect between science and the American public. So we shall get started by looking at where things are today. Now, just 38% of Americans correctly answered this question. The universe began with a huge explosion, true or false? There's different ways to interpret that, but 38% is a pretty low percentage. About half don't believe in evolution and think the Earth is less than 10,000 years old. And just 18% of Americans say that they know a scientist personally. I'm going to come back to that in a little while. But about half of Americans can't even name a scientist. And when they can, you guys, what do you think the top 3 answers might be? Just yell them out. You guys are pretty good. You're doing better than most of America. I heard Einstein. I heard Hawking. The top 3 answers are Al Gore, Albert Einstein, and Bill Gates. Now, of these 3 guys, you'll notice that they're either not alive, not a scientist, or not the kind of scientists that I'm talking about today. And so scientists in the American mindset aren't very relatable. They're usually thought of as these older white guys in lab coats, not people that we know and care about, who we're friends with, who we can really understand, who are like us. And therein lies a lot of the problem. Now, this wasn't always the case. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, there was a great cultural appreciation of science, scientists, and science journalists. This was in the context of the space race. This was at a time when we were all watching Sputnik. Things were different. Science was really celebrated. Today, I would argue that science is as, if not more, relevant to the economy and to policymaking than ever before. But the cultural standing of science is in steep decline. What do I mean by that? Well, take, for example, if you watch 5 hours of cable news, you're lucky if you see 1 minute devoted to science and technology. And that minute isn't usually about the stuff that's going to really influence our lives. It's about diet or fitness. Between 1989 and 2001, the number of newspapers that had a weekly science section shrank by 2/3. So science is losing its cultural standing, and it's unclear what we can do about it. But with regard to the newspapers, the people who are trained to tell these stories, the people who have spent their entire careers preparing us to learn about pandemics and to learn about climate, because they are the translators, they're losing their jobs, and we're getting something else instead. Can the science community itself tell our stories? This is just some of my very compelling data on the sea cucumber from graduate school. The thing is, the way that scientists are trained to communicate isn't usually as effective at percolating out into the mainstream. We generally spend years studying one particular thing. We're very meticulous. We go through a very stringent peer review process, and we need to keep doing that. That's very important. But by the time our stuff gets published, it's published in these very kind of private journals that you have to have an expensive subscription even to access. And so it's not really something that the general public can either interpret, understand, or even gain access to. There is something that has changed more recently, and that is the rise of the internet, the sport and spectacle of the blogosphere. Can the blogger save us? Can the science blogger save us? Now, I've been blogging since 2006. I've been on a variety of networks, so I am someone who thinks that blogging does serve a purpose, does provide an engaging way to interact with the public. But at the same time, blogging has its limits. The bloggers will not save us. The bloggers will not be our solution to better science communication. And this is because the internet contributes a great deal to misinformation, to pseudoscience. The internet is in part responsible for the rise of the anti-vaccination movement, for example. You can look for any opinion you want on a science topic through Google, and you'll generally find it. So you can shop your science as easily as you shop for your Christmas presents online. We have a great deal of kind of mobilized communities, like-minded people that tend to agree with each other or really enjoy disagreeing with each other, that wind up on these blogs that very few people read, except within those communities. And so the most popular blogs tend to just have an anti-science message, or consider themselves science blogs, but spend a good deal of time just bashing religion or something like that. They're not exactly solving the problem. They're not creating a constructive conversation. They're often, in fact, creating a deconstructive conversation instead. But what about science on film? Science in Hollywood. Well, traditionally, scientists are depicted as freaks, geeks, or villains. So you have Dr. Evil, or you have socially awkward Rick Moranis in any number of films. Skepticism is something that's celebrated. It's the person who's the skeptic of science that's often the one who ends up being right in the end. And scientists themselves are not generally relatable characters. The good news is this is changing a little bit, because this is important. I said earlier that just 18% of Americans say they know a scientist personally, so many of us are getting our impressions from television and film. In 2009, the National Academies launched the Science Entertainment Exchange. And this is an effort based out of Los Angeles to get filmmakers and scientists talking. Now, of course, Hollywood is about entertainment. It's not always about science. But the argument is that, if we work to include more science in the plot, it can create even a more compelling story. And we're seeing some of that. Films like Avatar did incorporate a lot of science into the storytelling. And of course, today we have the popularity of television shows like Breaking Bad and like The Big Bang Theory, where maybe the characters aren't quite the people we know, but they are a little more relatable, they are a little more real, and they are putting a different kind of face, sometimes a different color face, a different gender face on who we are and what we do, giving us a chance to start telling our own stories a little bit more. Now, I pay close attention to politics. I've been working in policy and political areas since I was working in Congress, and I was paying a lot of attention leading up to the 2008 election. A group I was working with, sciencedebate.org, started following science topics just to see if science had any kind of prominence along the campaign trail. This is just one example. But leading up in the months to the election, we looked at 171 interviews with the candidates, close to 3,000 questions, and so I put to you, how many do you think mention climate change or global warming, arguably the greatest challenge to this planet? How many do you think? 7, 6. You guys are so good because the answer is 6. And maybe that's a decent number, but I want you to consider that 3 mentioned unidentified flying objects. And it's clear that science does not probably have a prominent place in campaign politics. But it's 5 years later, so what happened in the last round? Did we improve? In some ways we did. If you incorporate MSNBC did a fair job of covering climate change this election. But I can tell you, if you don't count MSNBC, leading up to the election of 2012, Joe Biden's smile got 3 times more election coverage than the topic of climate change. So the point is, we still have quite a long way to go. Why does any of this matter? Why do we need an engaged public? Because all of these issues aren't just about the scientists themselves, they are about all of us. And I've just included a few images here to represent some big things coming down the pipeline, many of which are already here, but just to give you a sense of why this is really our story. It's not a science story. I'm sick of science being treated as a special interest group. Science is relevant and part of how we live and who we are, and if scientists themselves don't start working on ways to tell our stories, other groups are going to do it for us, and we're not always going to like the result. I just have a picture here representing neuroscience. Neuroscience is starting to question concepts like free will. Genetics are changing fundamentally our concepts of, in some ways, what it means to be human. We have the rise of the anti-vaccination movement. Places like Austin where the whooping cough is coming back because parents are opting not to vaccinate their children. I have here a picture of a clownfish. Now, raise your hand if you've heard of ocean acidification. A few hands are going up. What this is all that excess carbon in the atmosphere doesn't just warm temperatures. It's being absorbed into oceans. Oceans are actually buffering the effect of climate change, but as a result, the very pH of oceans is changing. And this is a big deal. Anyone who's kept a fish tank knows that if the pH changes, this can influence the animals that live there. Oceans are a big part of our planet, and so we're already seeing changes in species like clownfish and how they behave because of small changes in pH that are already taking place. But unfortunately, the media doesn't seem to be covering it very much. And then, of course, lots of questions in health policy about who owns our cells, what insurance companies can find out as we learn more about the human genome, and climate change, of course. And these are just a handful of examples that are relevant to all of you. Oh, and then there's energy. See, I work in energy now, and energy is inherently related to every significant challenge of the 21st century. Energy is about food security, water depletion, national security, climate change. It's about everything that we talk about in the news, and yet most Americans don't even know what energy means. Energy isn't a topic we learn about in school, and so it's very ambiguous. And we're just not focused on it. Just as an example, in the most recent poll asking Americans where is it most important for the government to spend your tax dollars, energy ranked last under other. We've got a long way to go. But there is a lot that we can do. And I'm going to talk at the end now just how we might be more effective at communicating science. But really, this is about communicating anything. The first is about adapting to new media. A lot of people, but really a lot of people in the science community are very hesitant to get on Twitter, to use Facebook. It just seems awkward and weird, and this isn't what we trained to do, and why do we want one more responsibility with an already busy schedule? The thing is, social media matters. Social media reaches far more people than ever before possible at speeds we couldn't imagine just a couple decades ago. And so engaging with an audience through online media really makes a difference. This is where most Americans are getting their news. There's even been research published that if an article gets tweeted about, it's more likely to be cited in the scientific literature later. Translate the scientific jargon. This is so important. So often we talk in, as I was saying earlier, in our p-values, in our stats, in ways that aren't really relatable. So figuring out ways to tell our stories that our audience understands really can make a difference. Which brings me to learning about your audience. A talk to a bunch of kids at a museum must be different than a briefing to a chief of staff on Capitol Hill. Thinking about what they're comfortable hearing, what they're used to. Choosing our cultural references carefully can make all the difference in what they take away. Anticipating questions and preparing. Preparing matters so much, and we often forget it, and we often don't really consider what the next question after our talk might be. So thinking ahead, thinking about the needs and concerns of your audience is important. And then, of course, simplifying without dumbing down. This is pretty important. At the end of the day, when I worked on the Hill, I might have a stack of briefing packets this high, but all I had to bring to my boss was 3 points on anything. What is it? Why does it matter? How does it affect me, my state, my constituency? I think all scientists should be able to do this with their research, no matter how specific it is. Because after all, most of us are funded by tax dollars, and we're certainly not doing very well at getting tax dollars more now than ever before. So we need to be able to explain what we do to anyone. And finally, the last point, the thing I want to leave you with here today, the thing that if you don't remember anything else from my talk, remember this. It's the most simple thing we can do, and it's what we so often forget because we're so excited about our research, and we've been doing it for years, and we want to share our methodology, and we want to share our conclusions in detail, and we want to tell you every step along the way, that we forget to listen. If more of us learn to be better listeners, if we not only listen after a presentation, but we offer our contact information, we ask for follow-up, and we allow people to approach us and bring us their questions, then it becomes a two-way conversation. And then we're going to be better communicators. Thank you.